Hello there, and welcome to the next episode of the Self-Reliant Creative Process. And I know for those of you, many of you, following along all these episodes, in the back of your mind, you've been thinking, when is he going to talk about deadlines? And I'm not going to talk about deadlines today. I'm going to talk about deadlines right now. Yep, it's time. Here we go. The reality and value of deadlines. Of course, deadlines provide a focus. And let's take an externally driven deadline like taxes due on the 15th of April. And now it's April 14th. And what is our status? There's also the internally driven deadlines that we want to accomplish something by an arbitrary date. And setting deadlines acts as a marker and causes us to throw the dart, which of course is very important because we got to throw the dart to get started with anything. And there's an urgency that develops when a project's next steps depend on current efforts. But we have to be realistic about our estimations. And that's because we underestimate time frames because we think in a bubble of a perfect world. We don't allow time for distractions, welcomed or not, taking breaks or becoming temporarily engaged, willingly and productively, with other activities, not to mention getting sick or life otherwise taking over for periods of time. And sometimes when we get too excited, we enthusiastically set deadlines, thinking the only other activities going on are eating, sleeping, and breathing. And how likely is that to happen? Well, what do deadlines really mean, though? So let's consider the origin of the word deadline, which is a line around a prison beyond which you are shot. So that said, Andy likes to say that most deadlines are false, arbitrary, or fabricated. Sometimes they are agreed to. That the real issue surrounding deadlines is risk. If the deadline comes and goes, the key factor to measure is risk. If we create a deadline with no consequences to ourselves or others and miss that, any risk involved? If we overshoot the IRS deadline, however, what's the risk there? Financial penalties. So deadlines do provide status reminders relative to our project. And if we constantly need externally driven deadlines, then something's lacking around our internally driven discipline. Now, what about deadlines generated by employers and people we otherwise work for? The risk to us becomes getting singled out, getting fired, losing the work, or perhaps the employer or the client realizes meeting the deadline represents an impossible task, but often, again, arbitrarily and externally set. Now, if we don't meet any deadlines, arbitrary as they might be, the risk exposes something else. Now we're not getting anything done. As our level of function evolves, we actually experience fewer decisions because they've become so obvious, they just start making themselves up, and this streamlines our decision making. And the deadlines shift from external to internal. And we stay connected to our creative process and allow those deadlines to start internally driving us because it's the impetus of wanting to see our project turn out. How's it going to be? Hopefully a beautiful thing. But if not, let's find out and move on to the next one. So along with that concept of deadlines is the idea, next guideline, of keeping daily affairs current to create more opportunities. Being even reasonably current with our life opens the door of possibilities. This never resonated for me until I developed a greater understanding of the creative process. And I understand being caught up is relative because look at, you can do all the laundry and an hour later you take a shower and voila, you got more dirty laundry. But you also have a bunch of clothes you can still wear. And when the laundry piles up to the point you got nothing else to wear, you have to drop everything to do the laundry, that is an impediment to your flow. And this creates a concept of looking at things as one's service versus chores. So in my household and in my world, there are no chores, but there is a significant amount of service. And it's a mindset because chores is something to get through, and there's a lot of negative connotations that we have. Our parents made us do chores as children and so on and so forth. Service is a whole nother animal. Service is the expression of unconditional love to ourselves, to our bodies, to our environments, to each other. There's something beautiful about getting caught up and staying relatively caught up with the major important things in our life because we can flow. So I know that on a given day, I've got potentially 2 hours of service, cooking my meals, dealing with the garden, managing the administration of my business, all of those things. But as long as I put in that block of time pretty much every single day, if something amazing comes up in my life, I can basically drop everything for 3 days and go on a great adventure. I can drop everything for 3 days and just completely absorb myself in writing a new song because I've got a bunch of food ready to go in the fridge. The laundry is caught up. The phone calls are caught up. And that means time and opportunity finds us. If we're always behind, we have less chance to take advantage of random occurrences because we don't have the time, energy, or resources available. We cannot operate in a state of being 5 minutes behind perpetually because it's really hard to drain the swamp when you're up to your ass in alligators. So I like to, as much as I can, utilize the only handle it once principle. I try to touch the items and the paperwork and complete them right then and there. Just the other day, I was in the middle of doing something, busy. I was outside, blah, blah, blah. The mail comes by, and there's like 4 pieces of mail that I've been waiting for and I'm really interested in. And it was so hard to not stop what I was doing to want to open that mail. But the reason I didn't open the mail is because I'm not going to process that mail. All I could do in that moment was open it and set it down and add something else to my mind, which was already fully occupied with what I was doing. So it was a huge piece of discipline for me to say, fine, here's the mail, keep it there. When I'm done with this, this, and this, then I'll open and process the mail to a point of completion and move on. We've talked before about nothing remaining incomplete in nature. So it's time to apply that to ourselves. And I remember a client I had years ago at a small business, very sharp, and he just had a mindfulness about him. He was very Zen-like. And he would say to me that he realized there's many, many, many things that would be very productive to spend an hour a day on. And the list goes on. And he just didn't have that time because running his business, and he was growing and doing very well with it, that was the center of his attention. And he was married, so that was also the center of his attention. But he had a way of having these little 10, 15-minute blocks of time every day, or most every day, for exercise, for meditation, for quiet time. And he just sucked the sweet out of that gum for that period of time. He was very focused, and that's what he did. And he got an enormous amount of value because it's real easy for us to say, well, I need this much time to do this thing, and if I don't have it, I'm just not going to do it. Now, did he get the same benefit of doing 15 minutes of exercise that he would have gotten for doing it for an hour? Well, of course not. But that 15 minutes is way better than no minutes. And that's what often happens. And this is how he maintained momentum. And he had an ability, as we were talking about in the last episode, about the seamless transitions. he moved from one thing to another beautifully and fluidly. And this whole idea of staying current for me really came to roost when I had an opportunity to go overseas for a few months. And so I started this game, and I said, well, if I left tomorrow, what's got to get done today so I can go? Well, you need a passport, and you needed this, and you needed that. So my activities became very prioritized. And at a point, all the critical stuff was handled. And then I started working on the affairs that would have to do with my life immediately upon my getting back. And when I realized was that I was getting caught up with my life, and then when I actually got back, I was in good shape with my permaculture and my continuing education and my work with clients and the various things that I do in the course of a day or a year. And then I created this little yearly calendar, and it breaks it down each month what happens. Like October is when I do my continuing education relicensing. Can I pay my property taxes on this month and the car insurances that month? And all I have to do is once a month look and say, oh, well, this is coming up. And I never do the, I forgot the blah, blah, because it's on the page. And I only got to look at it for a few minutes once a month. And sometimes big opportunities occur, and we have to suspend our existing task and vision and just do the critical activities until we integrate that opportunity. Because when we stay current or ahead with our tasks, the vision of our life, and current with our affairs, we recognize possibilities we wouldn't otherwise. We'd have missed them because we're operating from being behind or just treading water. And we step into these moments without consequence or losing our momentum because we're coming from strength and power. We're caught up and we're almost like running ahead of the curve. And I remember once I was just starting with the permaculture, and a couple of friends came by to help in the garden, and I had my little task list ready, and I reviewed my activities with them, and they had a little experience. So one was going to do these things and one was going to do that thing, and I was over here doing my thing. 10 minutes later, I come around from the side of the house. They've completely abandoned what they're doing, and they're like wandering around, and they're talking about this and that, about the garden and the property. And I'm like, okay, look at, my focus is chop, chop. I'm on these tasks. But they were all about the vision. And I did this little mental thing where I said, am I pretty caught up with everything? Like, if we did nothing today, would we still be growing the food? Would we still be okay? And it was like, yes. So I thought, let's let the task list go this 5 minutes, and let me see what magic they conjure up for the vision of this permaculture and the property. And it was amazing what they did. And it would not have happened if I would have felt urgency untowardly about the tasks because I was behind or I needed to get this done, and this sort of a scarcity. It was like, no, you're good. You're caught up. If you don't weed today, you can weed in 3 days. You're fine because the weeds haven't taken over. And when we're current, it allows the suspension of immediate activity with minimal consequences. And this is how we can just beautifully expand our vision about some part of our life, about all of our life. And there's a beautiful flow that comes from that. So I invite you to consider how you can do that more in your own life. And I invite you to do some homework. And that is, think about deadlines. Not too much, but a little bit. Like, what deadlines do you do the easiest around? And which ones? Big time trouble. They'll be insightful, truly. And what would help you feel more current in your life and with your life? So all your units of mental activity aren't running in the background about all these things that got to be done, and you can actually be present. You know, people say, well, what does it mean to be present? That's what it means. It means that the computer in your head isn't running and running and running, and along with the head gab, right alongside of it, and you can just be there without fear of, oh, I forgot to do this or I forgot to do that. Well, you know, if you've got stuff cooking on the stove, you need to be mindful of that. But if that's not what's going on, you're free. That's a freedom. And it takes a while to get to it. And it depends on how involved and complex your life is. But if you make that a real choice to work towards, make a list about that, get yourself current, you'll be so happy you did. And then you can join me after you like and subscribe. Put your comments down below. Love to hear from you. You can join me in the next episode. And I'll see you then.